Thank you. And Happy New Year, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to the final webcast of the ARL E-Science Institute's webcast series of special topics. I think you'll find that today's topic is of direct relevance to many of us, especially coming into the final capstone events. We have two remaining capstones, one in Phoenix next week on Monday through Wednesday. We'll be seeing many of you there. And then the last capstone in Dallas, right after ALA, is the 25th through 27th of this month. So as we head into these events, I think hearing more about cyber infrastructure is something that we'll all need to know much more about as we complete these SWOT analyses and start to think more carefully about specific strategic plans for our institutions. So we're very fortunate to have as our speaker today David Miner, who is one of the faculty for the E-Science Institute. David works at the University of California at San Diego, where he has a dual appointment between the libraries and the San Diego Supercomputer Center, where he's been focusing on digital preservation and digital data curation. So specifically, he's the manager of the Chronopolis service, which is a national-scale digital preservation network, and also available as a service to all of you and other institutions that need large-scale cyber infrastructure and preservation services. He has been the lead on the Research Cyber Infrastructure Initiative at the UCSD campus, where he has worked collaboratively with other parts of the organization on their research data and cyber infrastructure strategy. And he's also co-authored a lot of papers on digital preservation and is a frequent speaker at conferences, so he's a perfect candidate for today's webcast. David has a background in philosophy rather than computer science, but I think you'll see that his various technical positions and backgrounds have positioned him very well for this topic. So I also wanted to mention that following David's talk, we're going to have a brief update and presentation from Clifford Lynch, who is the director of the Coalition for Networked Information, CNI, and I'm sure Cliff needs no introduction for most of you. But he is the executive director of CNI and one of the world's leading experts on cyber infrastructure and how it relates to libraries and also higher education organizations. So he will be following David for about 10 minutes with just a quick update on the state of cyber infrastructure in the U.S. and whatever else he feels like talking about. And then we will close when he is finished. I will be moderating questions. And as you'll recall, there is a Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. So anybody who wishes to ask a question can just click that button and type it in, and I will get it passed to the appropriate speaker. You can ask questions at any point, and I will direct it to the correct person. And David will be pausing a couple of times during his presentation just to make sure that we don't have any pending questions. And I think that covers it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David. David, take it away.
Thanks very much, Mackenzie, and hello, everyone. I'd like to echo some of the things Mackenzie just said, just briefly, and to say hello on behalf of the rest of the faculty of the E-Science series here. We actually really enjoyed meeting and working with the people who were in Atlanta at the end of November and are very much looking forward to the Phoenix and Dallas events. For those who haven't been, they're very interactive, they're very hands-on, and they're actually pretty productive. So we're really looking forward to those starting again next week. I also wanted to echo again you're kind of lucky today. You're getting two presentations for the price of one. My section of the presentation is going to be about 30, maybe 35 minutes, give or take, and then Cliff will be joining us at that point and doing his talk. And as Mackenzie said, he needs no introduction. I'm very excited to hear what he has to say. It's a new year. I'm sure he's got some new things to talk about, so I think we're all looking forward to that. Logistics of the talk here today, I basically have it divided into three large sections. I'll be starting out talking a little bit about the history of cyber infrastructure, how we got here, why we got here, what's the purpose. Then go into a short section on definitions, and these are very much working definitions so we can have some kind of common language and lingo to talk about. And then the bulk of the presentation, I'll be doing some quick kind of an environmental scan and examples of cyber infrastructure, both at the national level and all the way down to the local institutional level. And after each one of these sections, as Mackenzie said, I'll pause and take questions. And then at the end, we'll also have some time for questions for Cliff when he joins us. So, just to jump right into this, the history of cyber infrastructure. Cyber infrastructure as a word and a concept has been around for quite a while, but it really started to gain common parlance in the mid-1990s. And you may recall some of the things that were going on in technology in the country in the mid-1990s. Two of the things really drove this movement. The first was high-performance computing was moving away from the concept of standalone monolithic supercomputers that did not communicate with anybody outside of themselves, where you could have researchers sitting in the room using them, and moved to a much more distributed environment. And this whole notion of researchers sitting hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the actual computational tools that they had to use. This was really when this change started to happen, was the 90s. At the same time, and this is absolutely not coincidentally, the Internet really reached maturity, the web really reached maturity, and that whole movement started. And these two things happening at about the same time really created some foundational and fundamental questions about how research and science are conducted. In fact, two things are really driving here. The first is, how do we best bring together these distributed resources? How do we best use them to improve the research that we're doing? And as I said, the second main question is, what impact will it have on science and research? And this second one is particularly important because I think it's one of the hallmarks of cyber infrastructure, is that from the beginning it's been a very, very much an outcome-driven process. It's not just creating infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. It's creating infrastructure for science and research and improving science and research. And that's really, really key. So into this time frame, in particular, we have the National Science Foundation coming in and realizing these things happening, and putting together a number of different panels and advisory boards and recommendations. And in 2003 was really a watershed moment, because one of the most important documents written about cyber infrastructure came out, I should say, and this was the report of the National Science Foundation on National Science Foundation Blue Ribbon Advisory Panel on Cyber Infrastructure. And the title is Revolutionizing Science and Engineering Through Cyber Infrastructure. And this is really important because this is really the first time that the whole notion of cyber infrastructure was kind of writ large in big font, the title of a document. And it was this moment of kind of coalescing all these things that had come before. This report is also commonly referred to as the Atkins Report, named for the lead author on the report, Dan Atkins, who is at University of Michigan. And the report was authored by, I think it was about 10 or 12 authors from major research institutions and universities across the country. And it's, as I said, it's one of the foundational documents. They use a lot of kind of contemporary examples for the time, some of which have changed and moved on. But in terms of the significance of the document and the content of the document, it's still well worth taking a perusal. I've put the kind of rather long and conflicted web link on here, but if you just do a web search even on the Atkins report, it will pop up. And I have the world's most wordy slide here, which I'm not going to read, but this is important because, in essence, if you had to kind of distill that document down and saying, what is it, why are we doing this, this is one of the foundational statements. And there are two key hallmarks of cyber infrastructure I did want to pull out of this. The first is this notion of research being pushed by progress in technology, that technology was rapidly happening and changing, at the same time that it's being pulled by the expanding complexity of the research challenges. And a lot of these challenges are themselves driven by technology, and a lot of them are driven by new sciences coming on board. And then the second hallmark is this notion of building new new types of science and engineering environments and organizations. And those last two words are very key, especially this notion of environments and organizations. And this is really what cyber infrastructure is. It's not just the bits and pieces. It's not just the cables and wires and computers. It's the entire suite or stack of services that are provided for researchers and scientists. And so out of this, there were three recommendations. There were a whole bunch of recommendations, but there were three kind of main recommendations that came out of the document. And it was that the NSF should establish and lead a large-scale cyber infrastructure program that is interagency, that is, works with other major agencies in the country, is also internationally coordinated, so it works with scientific and infrastructure elements around the world. And lastly, and this is really the key statement, and I will read this one, creates, deploys, and applies cyber infrastructure in ways that radically empower all scientific and engineering research and allied education. And I think it's important really to consider the last half of that sentence. They're talking about changing all of science, engineering, and research. So this really is a transformative moment and a transformative movement for the NSF. And so based on that, they did actually fund the Office of Cyber Infrastructure, commonly known as OCI, which is a major part of NSF to this day and will continue to be so into the future. And it has a number of different functions. It funds the creation of programs and tools and services, coordinates the research programs, both within programs and across programs. It continues to fund the national supercomputing efforts, the supercomputing centers and high-performance computing centers. And in general terms, it also guides the national discourse. I've provided here another one of the kind of long, convoluted NSF URLs, but this is to the office, to OCI itself. And again, it's something that if you're even vaguely interested in this topic, it's worth going to. They list all of the current programs and projects that they're sponsoring, as well as new solicitations that are coming up, new work that's coming up. And you actually may find that there are a number of things on there that sound familiar. As we'll get into the examples section a little bit later, this program has funded a number of the things that are part of our world in the e-science and librarianship, if you will. So we're a little early into the presentation, but this is kind of a pausing point. I don't know if we have any questions on the board just yet.
No, nothing yet. So keep going.
I will keep going. Jumping into the second section, definitions. And as I said, I wanted to just kind of put a line in the sand with some working definitions. These are more kind of based on common agreement and common usage as opposed to kind of quote-unquote dictionary definitions, and that's intentional. First one is, if you will, the stuff, because infrastructure is a major word in cyber infrastructure, and that's significant, obviously. That cyber infrastructure, on the one hand, you can refer to it as the collection of hardware, the bits, the bytes, the networks, the wires, the computers, whatnot, and the staffing needed to manage these things to create the environments to support data acquisition as management, as well as all the necessary tools, the computational tools, and the information processing services around it. So again, this is really driving at cyber infrastructure as a collection of things that people use in order to do science and research. In many ways, though, the second definition is becoming more and more common and important, and I kind of think of this as the plan in some sense. And this is really how it gets operationalized. And this is also how it tends to be referred to by the users of cyber infrastructure, the scientists and the researchers. And this is the why, right? If I'm pretend to be a scientist right now, what are the technologies that I need to be able to do my work? What are the technologies that I need to be able to use to share my work with my colleagues, whether at my own institution or across the world? How are laboratories connected? How are the data connected? It's all kind of those steps that are layered above the local specific hardware layers. And these two definitions were pretty kind of commonly accepted, especially the first 10, 12 years of cyber infrastructure, if you will. And not surprising, what we're seeing is very much a merging of these two things, especially as kind of new generations of scientists and researchers are coming out who have grown up in this world. And so I think most of us have experienced this probably on our own local campuses, that we have researchers coming up who have not only their own specific domain expertise, but they also have expertise in writing software or putting together tools or kind of developing a lot of the hardware pieces at the same time. And so again, this is this notion of kind of the organic growth of cyber infrastructure and how it interacts with science and technology. So just kind of drawing this up in pictures in many ways, cyber infrastructure really started out in two pieces. You had the underlying computer storage and networking, the bits and pieces. Way kind of floating above that, you began to have development of software programs and services and instruments, some of which take advantage of the storage and networks. And then you have the development of the middleware layer, which is how all of these things get shared, how all of these things get used, and all of these things together are what becomes cyber infrastructure. And for me, that's really the most important concept, is that cyber infrastructure is the whole stack, more than just the things, more than just the people. And I think this will get borne out in the examples I'm just about to jump into, and you'll see that that's the important hallmark there. I did want to take one brief little side here, just because there is one confusing notion, especially within the ARL E-Science Institute, which is that what we commonly refer to as cyber infrastructure in North America, especially the United States, and most of the rest of the world, is called E-Science. Same stuff, same operations, same philosophies, all those kinds of things, a different word. And this has really been driven, or was initially really driven by, in the UK, the same way that you had the NSF in the United States, kind of pushing cyber infrastructure and improving it. You had the government in the UK doing the same thing in the name of e-science, putting together programs and within universities and funding research centers, et cetera, et cetera. Now, obviously, we're sitting here in the E-Science Institute. This is a completely different use of that word, but don't need to confuse it. But just keep in mind that if you run into especially articles and documents written outside of the United States about this, they will tend to talk about E-Science. Again, we've reached a bit of a pause point here. I'll again pause and see if we have any questions yet.
Nope. No, keep going.
Okay. Full speed ahead. So I wanted to jump into the examples of cyber infrastructure around the country, and this is really the most important part of the presentation. And I wanted to note a few things before I jump into them. First off, for the vast majority, I really can't answer questions specifically about the services that they're offering. I will be actually talking a little bit of length about what we're doing at UC San Diego, and I can certainly answer questions there. But on the other examples, I've provided either web links and or individual contact names where appropriate. If you want to, say, contact to find out more about how they're implementing some of these things. But again, that's up to you. And again, I'm presenting this as kind of a quick scan of examples. And I would ask you, and especially those who have not been to one of the capstone events yet, to think about how this compares to your own institutions. I think you'll find sometimes a fair amount of overlap. Some of this will sound very familiar. Some of it will sound very different. And as Mackenzie said in her introduction, these are the kinds of things that we'll be talking through at the capstone events, how they apply to our own local institutions. So, the first example I wanted to talk about is often cited as the main example of cyber infrastructure. It was one of the very first ones. If you recall, the Atkins report came out in 2003, and the Terra Grid began in 2004. and that's again not coincidence. TeraGrid it's actually ended at this point, one of the largest cyber infrastructure programs in the world, certainly in the United States. And TeraGrid basically was an NSF program that united, I think, more than a dozen research institutions across the country, and creating to really provide this national cyber infrastructure program for hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists and researchers to be able to access and use shared services. I've put on this slide some of the big kind of technical details of it. 2.5, a little over 2.5 petaflops of computing capability. If you don't know what a petaflop is, let's just say it's a lot. That is significant aggregated computing capability. It provided more than 50 petabytes of online and archival storage. Again, this gets at the notion of having data available, whether it's immediately available spinning off of a supercomputer or uploaded in some kind of scientific portal, and then archived for the long term, whether it's in long term can be defined however you want it to be, but it provided that whole suite of storage services. And TeraGrid also hosted more than 100 domain-specific databases and research portals. And so you can think of this is this huge, huge research tool available to the United States and science. TeraGrid did wind down in the last year or so. There is a follow-on program called EXCEED, Extreme Science and Engineering Discovery Environment, which is just now spinning up, and which at the moment has a 5-year horizon that may lengthen as they get closer to that. And it's a follow-on TeraGrid, seeing where things can be improved or changed or added or deleted as needed. Another rather large research cyber infrastructure program out there is one that was mentioned in one of the earlier webinars, actually the Purdue one, which is the NanoHub. NanoHub is another sponsored program which created a rigorous and large-scale technical infrastructure which allowed science to be done. And it had a different focus than TeraGrid. Specifically, it was targeted towards nanotechnology research. And so it was a place where it is still a place where you can go and access and look at and download and work with a huge amount of data and research that's being done in this area. And in some ways, you can think of it as having I had the multi-layer approach picture definition thing of cyber infrastructure earlier. The NanoHub really demonstrates this quite well. They have a software layer where they have simulation programs, downloadable code, things can be contributed and shared. They have a technology layer with science gateways where you can go and access tools, again, the rigorous networks and applications that are used to underlie the infrastructure itself. And then they have a wide range of teaching and learning materials that you can download and use also. So I think, again, this is a pretty good example of that whole stack of things being there. Another program I'll touch on very briefly because I think it's actually probably pretty familiar to most people here is the DataNet program, the official name of which most people don't know is the Sustainable Digital Data Preservation and Access Network Partners. This was started around 2008. It is ongoing. They've given up almost $50 million for this, scattered around almost a half dozen large programs with many partners. And I won't go into the details because I think, like I said, most people are already familiar with this, but if you think about what you know about DataNet, it really is cyber infrastructure. How do we take tools and services, hardware pieces, staffing, research goals that are scattered across the country, across a wide range of institutions and domains, and bring them together into kind of one seamless whole to create new science and to enable us to reuse existing science. So another really good example. So these are just kind of three big overarching national programs. I wanted to talk just briefly about some domain-specific programs, and there are dozens of these out there. I just picked a couple that I actually know about and just wanted to touch on them really briefly. The first is one that's kind of near and dear to those of us in California, the Network for Earthquake Engineering Simulation, and this is a place of more than a dozen research sites which provide tools and services, repository services, dissemination services, et cetera, for all research based on earthquakes. And it's kind of interesting. This is completely accidental. I did not plan this. This is a screenshot of their website, and they have one of these rotating pictures on it, as many sites do, and the one that was up when I took the screenshot was Cyberinfrastructure. So they actually clearly see this as their driving mission and driving goal. And this is a really good example, a really rich example of tools and services that are targeted towards a specific domain as opposed to kind of widely distributed around the country. Another similar example is open topography. Open topography is an example of something called a portal, a science portal, and it is another NSF-sponsored program that brings together high-resolution topography data. And it aggregates data, and this is kind of the definition, working definition again of a portal is it takes data that is scattered from many different sites around the country and aggregates them so that people can go to one site and access a wide variety of tools and services and data. And open topography is really, really a good example of this. They take in huge, kind of really rough data sets, clean them up, provide rich metadata, make them ready for publication. They host some publications on their site, and they do this for a wide range of audiences. So not only do you have researchers in the field accessing this site, you also have land managers, kind of state government people, anyone who kind of needs to know the lay of the land, literally the lay of the land in their local area, can go and find a rich community of resources here. One other example I wanted to bring up on the national scene is a little bit different here. And it's one I think most people, again, are going to be pretty familiar with, and it's the HATI Trust. And I'm actually bringing this up as an example. I don't think most people, when they first think about it, think of HATI as a cyber infrastructure service, right? We usually think of it as the search tool, a browse, the digitization efforts, the full-text searches, all those kinds of things. And that's all true, but if you really reflect on how these things function, right, that underneath the covers, as it were, there's an enormous amount of technology happening here. There's an enormous amount of technology development in terms of code writing, kind of front-end and discovery tools. There's a huge infrastructure, a repository infrastructure shared among multiple institutions. There's constantly data flowing between these institutions on high-speed networks. So again, it's functionally really, really similar to a lot of these other national programs. Again, to the user coming to this, they can find out about it if they want, but they don't necessarily have to. But it's this really rich environment underlying it. So again, those are kind of big national programs. I wanted to touch briefly on some local examples very quickly here. And the first one I wanted to hit on is Penn State University. And this information was provided by Mike Jarlow, who's an architect there of digital services, and wanted to give this as an example. And this is one where hopefully it'll start to kind of ring some bells with things that you're either doing or thinking of doing on your own campuses. So he works within the Digital Library Technologies group, which is a division of the campus's information technology services. And they're working hard right now for defining and implementing service levels and services for archival storage and repository services for the university. And so it really is, how can the university, I mean, Penn State's obviously a large research university, how can the tools and services that, say, are being developed at individual departments or programs be best improved or brought together or shared on campus to enable better science and reuse of science? In addition, the Digital Library Technologies Group works hand-in-hand with the university libraries in working on a publishing and curation services program to really support digital stewardship at the institution. And Mike noted in our conversation that this is a pretty significant cyber infrastructure development piece for them. It, again, is that whole stack of services in terms of storing, access, discovery, and preserving over the long term. And one of the reasons I chose Penn State as an example, and I think it's a really good example, is they're really doing this development with an eye towards community shareable, open services and technologies that are flexible and could be applied in a wide range of scenarios. And I think, again, that's important for cyber infrastructure development. If you, again, think of it as it's not just tools for tools' sake, it's tools for improving research, that's an important notion. Another example I wanted to highlight briefly is one coming from Cornell University. Cornell obviously is an institution rich in technology, and the Cornell Libraries and development in kind of library and information services at Cornell has a long history of technology development. And they have a program called DataStar, which has been in place for 2 to 3 years, I believe now, and has a large-scale goal of looking at methods for how researchers can collaborate and share their data through the use of and by promoting high-quality metadata around that data. And they have had over the last few years a couple different ways of approaching this. Obviously, metadata creation is something that librarians do very well. We've done for forever, and that's an important piece of the project. But they've also been looking at this notion of how can data be shared between local repositories to campus repositories to national repositories. What does it mean for data to be able to be handed off between these repositories? What is it that needs to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a really nice conversation with Gail Steinhardt about Cornell about this, and they're really looking at the best ways to work with their researchers and make this happen. Two things I'm just going to mention for about 30 seconds here because we've already seen them in our webinars, but I wanted to remind people who've been on these earlier ones, I think two good examples of campus cyber infrastructure that we've seen were actually presented in earlier webinars. The first is Johns Hopkins, which Saeed Chowdhury presented right before the holiday break, actually, on the Johns Hopkins Data Management Service. And he sent me a couple slides talking about this, and these may look familiar. I really wanted to emphasize here, though, not just the services, the data management services that they are offering on campus, I should say, which are excellent, but that these things are really, the development of these started and was initially driven by the work that they are doing with their DataNet program, the Data Conservancy. And so it was this notion of, and we've already seen DataNet as a good example of cyber infrastructure, developing tools in a hardware infrastructure to work with science. Johns Hopkins, they're taking these national tools that they've helped to develop and bringing them back to their local users. So again, it's this notion of how can they best apply these things to their local campus. And especially there's the wide range of services, not just the storage repository, but especially the consultation services. And Saeed talked quite a bit and quite well about this, consulting both pre-award as awards are being grants are being written, and post-award data management services. Another excellent example, that we've heard in November from Jim Mullins and Purdue University is Purdue's Research Repository, or PER. And this is very clearly a strong cyber infrastructure program. It's a university-wide repository that researchers can use to put their data. It provides a wide range of services that they can layer on top of this repository. It provides both active reuse and access of tools as well as future planning for it. And I think this is a really excellent example. And again, I'm not going to go into this too much detail because we had a full presentation on it, but this is a slide that's going to be completely illegible, and that's fine. But this is the point of this slide is the bits in black and white are what Purdue has identified as their major kind of the research life cycle for data. And the yellow parts in red and yellow, are how the different pieces of PER and the different pieces of their program interact and support these needs. So I think this is, again, a significant example of how cyber infrastructure supports the research that's being done. And I want to thank not just Jim, but also Michael Witt at Purdue for providing these slides. Kind of the last university I wanted to highlight here just briefly is Indiana University, the IU Libraries and Cyber Infrastructure. Slides provided by Robert McDonald. People may be aware IU has done quite a bit of campus-wide development and work in terms of technology services. And a lot of the work that they're doing now came out of a recent, I think in the last 2 years, strategic assessment that the campus IT did about where the campus needed to be, where it was, where it should be going, et cetera, et cetera. And that really guided the kind of development that needed to happen on campus. And in fact, they have a slide or image that they use where they actually explicitly call out where the shared cyber infrastructure on campus is, where the kind of the domain silos are, and how they can interact with each other to support the work that's being done in each one of them. And the IU libraries are highly involved with this. They have a number of different services and projects going on. I'm not going to read the slide. There's a bunch of stuff on here, but it will be available in the deck later on, and it's pretty exciting, a lot of the work that they're doing. The last institution I wanted to mention, I will go into a little bit of depth here because it is the one I know about, is here at UC San Diego. We spent the last 3 or 4 years planning and putting together a new program, a cyber infrastructure program for campus, which has the name, the Research Cyber Infrastructure Program, or RCI. And this last year, we've started to implement it in 2011, and just wanted to highlight some of the important pieces of it. So it's comprised of 5 different elements: high-performance computing, data center co-location, storage, data curation, and then networking and other services. And I just wanted to jump in just really quickly on these examples to talk a little about what they are. So for the high-performance computing piece, we've instituted a new resource on campus called the Triton resource. And Triton is a high-performance computer, a supercomputer, but it's different than many others out there in that it's geared completely towards our local researchers. And the point being that it's easy to access, it's easy to use, it's cheap to use, and these things have not traditionally been the case with many supercomputers. And it's supposed to be a way, it is a way, for our local researchers to be able to have access to a significant resource for their own work. The second major piece here is data center co-location, and this is something that many campuses are looking at right now. And this is basically the notion that most research on campus is computationally based. And it's done on computers sitting under people's desks, in janitors' closets, in rooms that have inadequate heating and lighting, and et cetera, et cetera. And so the co-location is this notion of how can we incentivize people to stop doing that and to either A, put their existing machines into a 24/7 highly supported computer room, or B, not even have to buy their own machines, but rent or purchase machines centrally located that can be centrally managed. And so I think this is something that we're pushing pretty hard on this campus, and a lot of campuses are looking at. The SDSC, the data center, we've employed a new storage environment, a 3-tiered storage environment. At the highest tier is a parallel file system, which is a very high-speed file system just for basically high-performance computing. The second layer is project storage, and this is your kind of normal NSF type storage that you think of when you have mount points and install applications and things like that. And that's the middle layer. And then we have a brand new layer of cloud storage. And cloud storage is exactly what it sounds like. It's just like Amazon or Rackspace or Google or any of those, except that it's hosted locally. And this is provided as a very cheap, very easy storage system for people to access, people who may really be intrigued by using, let's say, an Amazon, but would rather work with a university who has some shared goals and shared aims as opposed to a commercial provider. Obviously, all these things are united via high-speed network and other services. We've implemented a 10 gig research network to most of the buildings on campus, enables us to move the data around and back and forth, and we have a lot of database and web hosting. I do want to highlight, finally here in this section, data curation. This is obviously very interesting and important to us. We're starting this out in a 2-year pilot phase, and we're using the cyber infrastructure that's been developed here on campus whenever possible. We're using the storage system at SDSC that I just referred to. We're using the digital asset management system that the UCSD Libraries have developed and have had in place for almost a decade now as a lot of our access and discovery tools. We're using the campus high-speed networking to get data from our researchers, and we're going to be using Chronopolis, which, as Mackenzie mentioned, is a long-term digital archive service for the data sets and data for long-term preservation. As part of that, data management plans, the obligatory data management plan slide. UCSD is part of the DMP tool that has been developed, and we are also teaching classes on data management on campus. So, kind of have my eye on the clock here, so I'm trying to sum up a little quickly, and hopefully we can step into Cliff Lynch in a moment. Cyber infrastructure is very much two things I wanted to emphasize. First, I wanted to re-show the slide from earlier that it really is the entire collections of services. If you think about traditional infrastructure, we tend to think of the bits, right? We tend to think of the highway system as the roads, the phone system as the wires and the phones. But cyber infrastructure is really more than that. It's the people, it's the applications, it's not just the infrastructure underneath it. And I think that's really what separates it and makes it important. Then the other thing, which I didn't mention at the beginning, but hopefully has also come through in a lot of these examples, is cyber infrastructure is very much this stack of local and institutional development programs and research, community and domain-driven programs and needs, and then coordinated at many times at the national level. Even if it's not top-down, it's enhanced or worked with at the national level. So, Mackenzie, with an eye to the clock, I can either take questions now, or if Cliff is here, we can jump into his section. Not sure.
There is one question, and you might be able to answer it quickly, so why don't we just take care of that before we turn things over to Cliff?
Okay. I am here, by the way.
Yeah.
Great.
Welcome, Cliff. This will just take a second, I think.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. David, are you aware of any of these campus-wide data management systems that are built with Hadoop or the Google MapReduce code? Or custom Terra-Griddy type infrastructure?
That is a good question. Yes, if you think I'm going to struggle a little bit off the top of my head to give some specific examples. I will say that the Hadoop and MapReduce kind of tools have gotten a lot of uptake and a lot of play in a wide variety of domains and research domains. I know here at UC San Diego, I mentioned our data curation program. As we go out and talk to the research groups that we're going to be working with who run the gamut from archaeology to oceanography to astrophysics to brain science, they're all looking at tools actually like that for working with large data sets, for analyzing large data sets, and for visualizing large data sets. So that's kind of a generic answer. Like I said, I don't necessarily have some good national examples of that, but it is an important movement in this world.
I can't think of any either, although I vaguely remember hearing about somebody who was starting to build a campus cyber infrastructure stack with Hadoop. So maybe you will hear more about that.
And, you know, it could be in 18 to 2 years. It could be UC San Diego, because, like I said, our researchers are asking for it. So I think we'll see as these things come to bear.
Okay. And one other thing I wanted to mention before I lose it is that you talked a lot about NanoHub and also NEAS, the Network for Earthquake Engineering. And I wanted to make sure people know that those run on the Hub Zero platform, which is available as open source software. So other institutions like Indiana are beginning to play with that on their local campuses. And all you have to do is go to hubzero.org to learn more about that platform. So if that's what you wanted to cover, David, I think we would probably turn this over to Cliff.
Please.
I haven't heard the questions yet. But folks, if you have any questions that are, based on David's last 15 minutes or so, go ahead and ask those, and we'll take them after Cliff's finished.
Okay. Well, thanks. Let me apologize in advance for some ambient noise. I'm not in the best of places, and I have limited control over that, but hopefully we'll be okay. Before saying anything else, I do want to pick up just for a moment on what Mackenzie was saying about Hub Zero, which is really, I think, gaining some significant traction as a platform for supporting specific scholarly communities who want to be mounting collections of data and particularly software that interact with data in various ways. I was interested to discover a few weeks ago, actually, that the Bamboo Project in the humanities is using Hub Zero for part of their work now. So it's actually starting to gain some interest beyond the sciences and social sciences. So I think that's a great pointer and is something not only worth watching, but maybe a very handy tool in certain situations. I just really wanted to make a few quick comments about sort of cyber infrastructure in the broad sense and where it's connecting up to some other issues. And I'm going to really go on for only about 7 or 8 minutes, I think, and then I'm delighted to field questions. One thing that I really wanted to put out and invite folks on the call to think about, particularly as they work on cyber infrastructure strategy at their own institution, is exactly how they characterize the cyber infrastructure program on one side and its relationship to very broad-based data curation on the other. Certainly, if you look at a great deal of the rhetoric around cyber infrastructure, if you look at a lot of the funding investments that have been made, if you look at things like the Atkins report, there's a tendency to emphasize these very, very large projects as sort of, poster children for cyber infrastructure. Yet, as we do studies around data curation needs, for example, we find that there's this what's often characterized as a long tail of data, research data that needs curation, and in many cases, the big problems are out on the smaller and sparser data sets that are being produced by relatively small research groups, but maybe of lasting importance and sometimes are intellectually quite complex to curate and document and reuse. Many institutions now are launching these programs to support data curation. Some are doing it explicitly in a cyber infrastructure context. Others are doing it really as a kind of an independent activity that's not necessarily closely coupled to a big campus cyber infrastructure activity. And I think that's a helpful tension point to think about as you think about programs on individual campuses. So that's one thought I would put out for your consideration. Second thing I'd just say is that the network, I think, is a considerably underestimated limiting factor as well as enabler here. I think that we are seeing a lot of stress in terms of our ability to move large amounts of data around casually. It's easy to talk about this. It's much, much harder to do it. And I still see a very significant bottleneck lurking between large data and the various processes that consume them and analyze them. I'm not sure this is going to get better real soon, and I hear increasing calls for strategies, for example, that move computation to the data rather than moving data to computational environments. Again, I think that's a big strategy issue, not just on campus, but as researchers want to employ national-level resources. and is one that probably bears some rather careful thinking about. Third point I'd raise is about software. Software, at least to my mind, is an absolutely integral part of e-science and our ability to construct cyber infrastructure. Yet it consistently feels to me like a very neglected component. It's neglected in terms of investment. It's neglected historically in terms of sustainability strategies. It also seems to be something that is often best dealt with on a level higher than a campus level. There are only a limited number of campuses, I would say, that really have the requisite expertise to really do heavy-duty infrastructural software maintenance. I think that there are some promising developments going on now. After being beat up from every direction as part of various advisory committees and things, the National Science Foundation and particularly OCI are investing now in some studies looking at issues around software sustainability and really some good but hard questions about what software really should be considered part of the cyber infrastructure, what should be considered at the level of disciplinary resources, and how sustainability strategies around those pieces of software might be funded across time. This looks to me like an area that really is going to need some concentrated attention, but where I do see some progress starting very slowly and painfully to take place. The last area that I wanted to touch on in terms of e-science, which I think is going to be a major issue for many campuses and probably very tough on an organizational and policy basis, as well as a technical basis, is the places where e-science connect up to medical enterprises, to healthcare, and to research in biomedicine. Certainly some of that funds through NSF on the life sciences, but a great deal of it funds through the National Institutes of Health and through other organizations like the Howard Hughes Institute, for example. These folks are becoming extremely potent producers of data on a very distributed basis. If you look at the current generation of sequencing equipment, for example, these things throw off fearful amounts of data and are not really that expensive. A lot of people can afford them now. There are, of course, very complex policy issues when we get into health records, but at the same time, there is a, enormous train that is starting to pick up momentum that says that one of the places where we're going to get high payoff is being able to data mine genomic data that's coupled to medical records. In December, in the UK, the National Health Service, because they have a relatively centralized record system through the National Health Service, but basically the Prime Minister announced that they're going to open up the records there to large-scale data mining by various parties, and the default as a patient in the National Health Service is you're opted in unless you explicitly opt out. we're hearing, more and more of that kind of thinking here, and it's very much in tension with some of the traditional things about the privacy of health data. But I'd invite you, for example, I was reading over the holidays a document that the FDA produced that talked about, how they were planning to change their strategy to accelerate and reduce the cost of bringing new drugs to market. And a very central set of strategies there involve large-scale data mining. So I think that it's really very timely to start bridging conversations that start looking at how people can work across the sort of life sciences and the medical parts of our institutions with medical schools. I think you can find, some other macro trends that are feeding this, like the very large investments that the National Institutes of Health are making now in what they call translational medicine, basically moving things from basic science to healthcare delivery settings and making those transitions. I think that's going to be another big developing area, and one that you may want to, particularly if you've got a medical school, give some serious consideration to as part of your strategy. One thing that's worth noting is that the language is quite different in the health sciences. They don't speak of cyber infrastructure much. They do speak lots about data reuse and data curation. They speak a tremendous amount now about data mining. But not so much about cyber infrastructure per se. So there's a little bit of translation that may need to go on there as you are helping to build up those bridges and connections. So those are just a few comments that I wanted to make about areas where I'm seeing some sort of emerging activity that may change the landscape, and where I think some of the developments may be worth really factoring into your campus strategies. I'd be delighted to field a couple of questions or comments if there are any.
I don't have any questions specifically for you yet, Cliff, although people may think of those in the next few minutes. But thank you for those interesting observations. I do have a question for David, which will probably take up the last couple minutes of our time, but we can go slightly over 1 o'clock if people have other questions they'd like to ask. So, David, a question came in about whether budgets for the library or other units that are involved in your RCI service have really changed or been reshaped because of this new cyber infrastructure service that you're offering, or can you talk at all about how that is affecting budgets on your campus?
Yeah, sure. That's an excellent question. So I mentioned when I'm talking about it that this was several years in planning and development, and the core funding for the current round of the RCI program is actually in the form of money that we are granted from the university chancellor. We spent a number of years writing up exactly what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, what we thought it would cost, these kinds of things, and said these are things that we think the university should at least consider paying as a core service, a core infrastructure. And so we did have this money, or we do have this money, I should say. And I mentioned especially for the curation effort, we're in this new starting up a pilot phase, and part of what we're charged with doing is looking at the budgets, is actually looking at exactly how much does it cost to do these things. And by cost, that means the entire cyber infrastructure stack, whether it's hardware, software, staffing, staff time, development services, all those kinds of things. And so to to answer the question specifically about UC San Diego, there has not yet been a radical shifting of budgets within our programs to support this new effort, but we do anticipate that there will be, and that's actually part of what we're investigating in this phase of the service, so that hopefully at the end of whether it's 18 months or 2 years, whatever the exact time window ends up being, we'll go back to campus and we'll say, okay, we underestimated here, we overestimated here, this was what was popular, this is what people said we'd need more of, and to really begin to shape the budget decisions at that point. So I think we also intend to be very open in this process as much as we can. So hopefully that we'll have more information coming out about this in both the near and kind of medium term.
Good answer. A couple of other questions have come in. If folks would like to stay on the line, we are at time. So I think before I go on to the last couple of questions, I'll just thank the audience and David and Cliff for their attention today. And anybody who needs to drop off, we are at 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock, depending on where you are. But for those who would like to hang on, we do have just a couple more questions. Cliff, a question came in about whether there is a citation you might be able to share or any more information about the FDA report you mentioned. We could post that on the ESI site later if there is one.
Yeah, give me just a minute to pull it up, and I'll give you the exact name of it.
Or if that's going to take too long, you could just email it to me, and I'll post it to the E-Science Institute site.
Let me just see if this is it. No, it's not. I'll mail it to you, Mackenzie.
Yeah. We'll get it posted. I'm sure other people would like to see that.
Yeah.
And then, Cliff, another question is whether you could say just a little bit more about this emerging area of moving computational code to the data rather than the other way around. Are there specific examples or anything people could do to learn more about that?
Well, that's actually an interesting one because it's not, strictly speaking, a new idea. It's one of these that, kind of rises and falls. If you go back, for example, to the work that Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn did on digital libraries, which incredibly is back in the late 80s, if I remember right. They wrote a very lengthy white paper about no-bots, which were, as they conceived it, basically, pieces of code that could be dispatched off to databases. Now you see this kind of resurfacing in various places. Certainly, if you look at the way census data is mounted, for example, they tend to put a certain amount of analytic capability packaged with the data. Statistical capability. My recollection is that actually, if you look at the work that Alex Sleze and his colleagues did on the Sloan system, that's a pretty highly distributed system. I mean, it doesn't explicitly move computation to the data, but it's designed to keep the computation fairly close to the data. The issues about moving computation to data are difficult because for at least two reasons. One is that you generally want some kind of sandboxed environment so that people can't do completely arbitrary things. The other is that you start needing to allocate blocks of substantive computational time along with access to the data, and that's not something that's historically been done, with the exception of some of these secure social science data centers. There are settings where, if you want to go and work on certain kinds of social science data, like crime data with identifiable subjects in the records, you basically go to these secure facilities and do it. So there, they do, allocate you time along with access, but that's a fairly unusual arrangement. Certainly, though, if you listen to people in the high-performance networking world now talking about things that need to be on the agenda, I am hearing that more and more from those sectors.
Okay. We do have one last question, but I think I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative here since we're really over time now. The question was, are there strategies for evaluating technology when you have few resources to dedicate to the problem, and how can you organize the selection and testing of tools that are available for data curation? And that is actually one of the major themes of the capstone events, opportunities for collaboration in this community. So I think we're going to hold that question for the actual capstone events that are coming up this month and see if we can collectively get the answer to that. Unless David or Cliff have a burning answer to it.
I sure don't have a quick answer.
Yeah.
I have a long answer, but not a quick one.
Okay, so hold that thought for the capstone events. And with that, I think I'm going to bring this to a close and thank everyone again. Thank you, Cliff and David, for your very interesting remarks.
My pleasure.
The audience.
Thank you.
And that brings the Special Topics webcast series to an end. So we'll see you at the capstone events, and thank you for your time. Happy New Year.